that will be the time.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for attending our first webinar, especially focused on the students and the early career researchers. I'm Wendy van Lippevelde. I work at Ghent University, and together with Sophie Kompernolle, we are the two representatives of the early careers and the students in the executive committee of the ISBNPA. So this is our first event, but we hope to organize many more in the future. So I hope you enjoy it. And I will now give the floor to Jo Salmon, our president of ISBNPA, and she will also be the moderator of this session. Enjoy.
Thanks, Wendy, and I'd just like to thank you and Sophie for your hard work in putting this together. We have two excellent speakers today. So we have Charlie Foster, who's Deputy Director of the Research Group and the WHO Collaborating Centre on Population Approaches to Non-Communicable Disease Prevention. And Charlie is going to tell us about his focus on acquiring money from non-traditional funding sources, very experienced in that realm. And we also have Professor David Crawford, who's head of the School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences and co-director of the Institute for Physical Activity and Nutrition. And David's also going to tell us from his extensive experience in grant writing some further tips. And I can also say that David's a fellow of the city and former president. So we're in good hands today. Now I believe, Charlie, you're going first, is that right?
Yep, just throwing the furniture around. Let's go.
And just a tip, a housekeeping tip for those who are attending today, you can ask questions during the presentations. You don't have to wait to the end. We'll have a couple of minutes at the end of each presentation for some questions, and also at the end, but you can also type your questions during the presentation that we can attend to after. So thank you.
Great, so just checking I've got my slides up and ready. Okay, Antonio, as everyone can see my first slide, you should see my name, the ISBNPA logo, and the title.
Yeah.
Hoping that's all good. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much to the ISBNPA crew for inviting me along tonight. I'm very delighted to be talking to you all. I'm very excited about the prospect of early career development. I think it's really important, and certainly for someone who's late in academia, I think it's a really important place to think about how you kind of construct your career, how you build your profile, and how you decide what kind of academic you want to be, if that's indeed what you want to do. So I've been set the tricky task of talking about trying to find non-traditional funding sources of cash. Okay, next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about the group that we run in Oxford. This image here represents what we get up to. So in the top sort of left-hand corner, as you look at the screen, the blue part, we look at cardiovascular disease epidemiology. We look at statistics that drive our diseases and incidence and prevalence. Top right side, we're very interested in nutrition. So we have a very extremely experienced and dynamic nutrition group who run trials particularly on food labeling at the moment. Going down to the bottom corners, we've got issues around sustainability and environmental development. And of course, my particular passion on the left-hand side, which is about physical activity promotion. And our research again tends to cover right across from epidemiology to correlate research, intervention design, and lots of policy-related work as well. So I've been a bit of a mongrel in my career, and I think that's a bit of a theme we'll pick up later on how to actually find money. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what Oxford looks like, this is a very typical morning. It's slightly misty and it's probably about to rain. But it's a very beautiful place to work, and some more lovely tourist slides. This is the view from the top left from my office. The top right, we have an indigenous shark problem in Oxford, same as Australia. How I get to work is on the bottom left. I use a punt, and those are my students dressed in fancy dress like Harry Potter, which is what they usually do. In fact, I'm lying. That is my office, top left-hand corner of a building site, and here is the view I have from my front window. So everything in Oxford isn't always what it seems. First of all, my declaration of interest. I think it's important to know who you are and where you're from. So top left, we've got the funding bodies that are currently funding my research. The top right are government departments and organisations who also have funded me, and typically you might find some more non-traditional funding sources in that pile. The bottom right-hand corner are the folk I do not take money from, so I don't take money from the food industry, from beverage industry, or from pharmaceutical industry. The bottom left is my kind of personal interest about bicycles and surfboards and paddleboards. And you'll see on the bottom that I'm also involved in the ISBNPA on the membership committee, and also involved in ISPA as the president-elect. And I'm very delighted to be working with my fellow organisation tonight. Okay, let's get to business. So what are non-traditional sources of funding? What do you offer is the next section, and that's really the most important one. So as you listen to me tonight, I want you to think about what are my skills, what are my strengths, what are my competencies in terms of research skills or personal skills or consultancy skills. And finally, what's the brand? What's the brand for myself, for the group I work in, and also for the university or perhaps the institution I work from? And finally, the big part, how do I find the money? Because that's the most important moment. Okay, let's start with the first question. So what do I define as non-traditional sources of funding? So typically, I think these are funding that don't come from those big research grants that everyone says, I got an NMSRC grant or an NIH grant. These are typically grants that lie outside, or funds or consultancies that lie outside these particular bodies and outside of the health sector. And linking outside the health sector is particularly important if you want to work, first of all, perhaps with local government or national government as well. Perhaps monies might come from charities. These might be ones with particular disease interests, like a cancer research one, or indeed diabetes. There could be money from competitions. These could include open competitive calls on perhaps patient or participant or public involvement in science. There can be industry-related funding for particular technologies. There can be other kinds of sort of random funding that just might pop out. You might suddenly meet an incredibly rich entrepreneur on the train, and your luck's in, and they decide to give some money. And finally, there's the global sources of funding with international agencies and things like the Gates Foundation. And finally, of course, there are internal university funding, and I might be treading on David's toes here somewhat, but I think you need to be creative to looking for internal funding from other disciplines. So this is how I'm going to draw a line around the outside of what are traditional sources of funding. And of course, what we're trying to do is go around this lovely sort of roundabout of generating your idea for your grant, finding the money, developing your proposal. And really, once you've got your idea, you have to find somewhere to take it. And I think with non-traditional funding is you've got to do a lot of listening and a lot of finding out what is actually required and needed, as well as generating an idea. Okay, so I did a little bit of self kind of analysis and looked at my my sort of research income by the kind of applicant, whether I was the PI, so I was the person kind of proposing the idea and writing the majority of the application, or as a co-applicant. And across my sort of checkered career, and I've been in research now for nearly 16 years, really you can see as a PI, I've got quite a lot of my funding from what we would say would be non-traditional sources, and including that government. So we're looking at the kind of green and the red contributions to the circle here. And as a co-applicant, it's almost entirely the other way. But in my early stage of the career, nearly all of my research funding early on came from non-traditional sources, because simply our group and myself personally didn't have the power to generate our own independent funding. So I think we have to be realistic about what's possible and at what particular stage of your career. So if you're working with David or Joe, you're going to go for big, high-quality research-funded grants from competitive kind of fellowships or capital infrastructure grants. I think in the early times, you're trying to find something that you can do that's going to be helpful and people will pay you for, and you can publish, and that's really important. Okay, so this is quite helpful, I found, for myself. So what do you offer? This is the time where we need to sort of look internally and think about a little bit about who I am and kind of what do I do. Not in a philosophical sense, but let's look a little bit at what you bring to the party as a researcher. So some of you may have seen me talk before about what's in your research skills toolbox. And if you imagine that every time you're trying to develop and add a little bit more in each of these particular domains, and this may not be relevant to you, some of these may or may not be, but for me, I think these are really important because they are particular parts you need to decide to work on and improve, because you need to be able to offer to any non-traditional research grant funding, first of all, is your core knowledge. What are you? Do you specialize in analyzing big data sets? Are you good at collecting data? Can you design trials? More importantly, can you run trials? That's particularly difficult. Do you have skills in recruiting people that perhaps in another occupation before you became an academic or in your training you learned how to communicate? So that's the first point. What's your core knowledge and area? You're a sports scientist, you're an epidemiologist, did you come from a health sector, you're a physiotherapist by training and converting? What's your core knowledge? Because you can use that when you go back into a research context, perhaps with that particular group you came from. My background came from teaching. I used to be a phys ed teacher. I used to work in industry, running corporate fitness programs. And I think all those particular skills are really important when you're trying to go bouncing back to understand the context from which people come from. So working in industry and also working in the health service for 10 years before becoming an academic, I kind of got a very good sense of some of the sort of real pressures of the real world and what is important, the priorities that are there. The second element really is, well, how good are your oral and written communication skills? Nobody wants to think they can't really communicate, and we all write brilliantly. Well, trust me, we can all get a lot better at this, and me certainly included. And so practice really makes perfect, and I know what's coming from David, so I'm not going to steal his thunder on that. Third element is, can you generate some ideas? Can you get the income, and can you write grants? And really, this is where practice comes in, and finding the right area and way. Finally, you probably have some sort of diagnostic and clinical skills which may particularly come from your sort of background and training. And these may be transferable and very required for working in particular context. I did a lot of training in counselling, and I found that listening skills was possibly the most transferable skill that I've developed. And that's very incredibly helpful when it comes to working, particularly with non-traditional grant holders who are unsure about what they want. And of course, all of us with our traditional research training have design and method in there and statistical approaches, analysing data. It could be quantitative or qualitative. It doesn't matter. You can answer a question in a very scientific and robust manner. The question is, of course, could you move out of a research context where typically we generate our own research questions and find the context to apply them and become a little bit more implied? Can you do evaluation? Can you try and focus on a question that's real world in a pragmatic sense and answer it? I think we all perhaps could, if we want to be transferable outside a research context, could find that really important. And finally, do you kind of know where you fit into the big world? If you're very, very good at looking at the cellular changes in relation to physical activity, the changes of blood flow, etc., what does that mean? How can you make that a bit more involved in the big and transfer those skills to other people who might particularly want them? And that brings me to my last point, is what's your network? Because your network is really important. Frequently we tend to go to conferences like ISBNPA or ISPA where we meet the same sort of folks who have a particular kind of mindset. I really enjoy going to completely new disciplines and environments. I went to a neurology conference last year, I went to a spatial epidemiology conference, and actually what you can do is start to steal ideas and methods and try and bring them back into our context. So not just only develop the networks of the people you know and the people you'd like to know more, but also trying to expand outside as well. And this is particularly important when you're trying to concentrate on building local networks. In your early stage of your career, the local connections you have, because of size and scale, you may be able to make much more of an impact. And getting that first $10,000 or £10,000 grant really can make a huge step, because all those skills will have to come into play for you to secure that funding. So building a network about what's needed locally could be a really important first step. So you always have a toolbox, you always need to improve on it, because that will help define who you are. So I say to staff, SWOT yourself. What are you strong at? What are you weak at? And what can you develop? It's particularly important if you're trying to present yourself as a kind of rounded academic, you really are clear about what areas that you do and what you don't know. You probably need to know enough about what you don't know you don't know enough about it, and don't try and bluff it because you get found out. So try and work on what areas you could develop, and keep thinking about what can I add to my skill set this year. What are the opportunities in your area? And I think I've made 3 particular kinds of ways of defining this. First of all, there are always the formal kind of opportunities that present themselves. They could be calls, they could be consultancy opportunities, and those sorts of things. And I think what you have to do is find out who knows about them. So typically in universities, there may be a group who will be a point of contact for perhaps calls from particular types of organizations who want support with work. Are you registered perhaps in your university on a registry of interests, specialities, topic specialisms, methodological specialisms? If, for example, the local media wanted someone who knows about schools and physical activity, would you be the person that they could interview? Because that kind of profile, again, will start to increase your network and your exposure. So, you know, take a media training course, put yourself on the front foot, and when there's a national story about something that you know something about, be the person that they ring up and say, well, what's your opinion about this? And I think that, that helps build your network and build your opportunities. And finally, of course, there are sort of more informal opportunities that might come along. These might be sort of competitions. They might be sort of, you know, sort of more kind of reactive opportunities, perhaps what I'm trying to say here. And a good example of this, I know certainly from David's group, you know, are capitalizing on these natural experiments that would occur. So if a local company is relocating, is there an opportunity for you, perhaps with a little bit of creativity, to put in some measures that might look at changes of behavior in terms of purchasing for nutrition, or changes in the sedentary behavior time, etc., with a new office environment? How can you be creative? And that's, again, by understanding what's going on. And I was thinking today about how you would go about doing this. And I think decided you need to make friends with the sort of the commercial moving companies that in your local area, because they will tell you when big firms are relocating. And that's obviously an opportunity for you perhaps to look at some of these natural experiment ideas. So of course it's about having a network. And finally, what are your threats? And it's a bit odd really to think about, well, you know, who are my threats? Well, you do have them, because you've got lots of other people who are chasing money as well. So internally, other departments and other groups might, for example, be chasing after the same kinds of funders that you might be interested in doing. So you need to know what they're good at, and also perhaps what they can't do, because that's why they need you. And external threats, of course, we are in a competitive world. Oxford University tends to have a reputation and a rivalry with other kinds of universities, and you know, we're all pitching potentially for the same pots of money. Well, the best way to convert a threat is to make them your friend. So if you can, for example, collaborate. I think there's one thing, if you look at my research profile and funding, is I've been very good at getting involved with other people's work and making sure that I can bring something fresh and new to the party. So if you can't beat them, join them. And eventually you can beat them. I know that happen. And finally, who are your threats in terms of ideas, people, and organizations? And I think physical activity is in an interesting moment. We kind of reached a bit of a crossroads. We seem to be the solution for lots of people's problems, but there doesn't seem to really be that kind of societal push and shift to trying to promote us as a kind of business, as it were. Certainly in nutrition, there are lots of external threats and the opposition is a bit clearer. But in physical activity, it's a little bit less sure. So how can we make sure that the way people are talking about our area, the way people are thinking about our area, the way the government are thinking about our area, or policymakers, or even our own institutions, that we value ourselves and we make sure that our message is consistent. So being clear about what you are saying publicly about your area is really important. Okay, so you found a potential non-traditional funding source. What particularly could you offer? I think what I've generated here is just a bit of a random list of things that I've done in the past, and I think things that everyone who's listening tonight could also do. First of all, you're a knowledge broker. You have the ability to share information to other people. You know, the latest research has just come out. There's a big kind of publication in a big journal, and there's a whole bunch of conversations. Let's say, I don't know, academic performance in schools is related to the sedentary behaviour time, and that was a big story in the UK last summer. How can you capitalize on that? Can you share information with people who might be interested in this? Do you have an opinion about it? Can you pose a little email? Hey, I found this paper, I thought you lot might be interested about that. That's about keeping the networks going. Because again, when they want particular technical data and information, then they'll think of you to go forward. And scoping out a particular area in order to help an organization answer a particular question or go in a particular direction is really important. The second point I've kind of said already, evaluation. We are good at answering questions, academics. Can we answer a question on behalf of another body in order to improve, let's say, a service, or check to see if they're having impact? Because in their world, they're also competing for funding, and they need high quality evaluation in order to sustain their progress in their organization. And you can definitely offer opportunities with that. So I would, of course, push improving your evaluation skills. Everybody has them. There's that pragmatic application. And of course, you know, ISBNPA people, we know there's a very good course going on before this year's conference, so please sign up. Technical advice. You're an expert, you have a particular depth of knowledge, make sure you're clear about what your message will be and we're consistent. But you do have technical information and support, and occasionally those particular things will be interested. People will be particularly interested in those. So, you know, in relation to nutrition, do you know, for example, the zoning code distances or the planning regulations in relation to how, let's say, how far a fast food organization may locate in relation to a school? They may be different across the world, but do you know what the regulations are for you? So having that kind of technical advice and its application to the real world is really helpful. Okay, dissemination. We're all quite good at communicating. We're all particularly good at communicating about our own work. So think about where are the other avenues that you could offer to disseminate people's work, and particularly work that may be generated on behalf of these other organizations. Obviously, conduction research. I think this probably should say conduct research. Obviously, we're good at doing that. As you get perhaps a little bit more senior, you can offer services to these organizations, and it could be about helping them make appointments, and it could be helping them decide their strategic direction and trajectory. And that's really, it's also quite important in terms of making longer-term sustainable contacts. So the organizations that I used to do small pieces of research for, I've now kind of weaved my way into their infrastructure, and I sit on advisory boards. Or if they're making an appointment, I would offer to just, you know, help make decisions about, you know, pre-screening, pre-interview, those sorts of things, because you're always trying to make sure you can improve them and also help to kind of sustain your profile. Okay, be clear on what you can offer. So, you know, as well as you're kind of hand-waving about how good you are, you've got to be clear about what you can actually do, and often it could be a solution to a problem. So a dose of physical activity or nutrition in this context can help with this particular outcome, and we clearly can do that. We could help you demonstrate that as part of your project. Does physical activity and nutrition, a dose of physical activity and nutrition in order to attract something to get something else. So, you know, if you increase children's physical activity, if they're in the under 5s group, for example, does it mean they sleep better? And actually that's very attractive to parents, and it's a very attractive idea, particularly in managing other behavioral outputs. So can you use physical activity as a kind of mechanism for tackling a problem? It could be antisocial behavior in terms of running midnight basketball leagues. There's a whole different way you can look at that. Can you help with better understanding about a particular problem? Can you reduce complex and difficult ideas down into easy, manageable parts that people can understand? Usually non-traditional funding organizations will be able to bring a particular specialist understanding an area. You may be able to connect them with other policy areas, particularly in physical activity and nutrition, connecting with environmental sustainability agendas, connecting with CO2 or carbon costs, those sorts of things. How can we be a bit more creative and just not thinking it's just about health, perhaps connecting to other kind of policy areas? And finally, of course, is what you can do. You can collect data, you can be precise in your measurement, and you can do very good analysis. So remember, you could always help analyze data sets. I'm constantly on the hunt for secondary data sets because one, someone else has collected it, and two, I think we can answer some good questions with it, bearing on its design and on its quality. And if it needs improving the quality, we can help with that as well. So look around. Okay. Don't expect opportunities to come to you. This is my one attempt at a funny slide. But if you sit in your office, money will not come knocking at your door. You need to get out there. So go and find the potential sources of funding. And I think I'm going to take the internal university-based funds, and I hope I'm not treading your toes here, David. But there are, particularly in universities or in other institutions, there are interdisciplinary funds. Interdisciplinary working seems to be a buzzword at the moment, and there does seem to be small pots of money potentially to kind of get people together. So if you're a physical activity researcher and you like gadgets, go and find your engineering and computer science department, because they like data and they like gadgets to collect it. And you, trust me, if you've got accelerometer data, you've got lots of data. You know, you could speak to computer scientists about different ways of doing data processing. So there's lots of ways you can kind of coalesce together, and by coalescing together you will be stronger. Are there potentially any small pots of seed funding, particularly in early career? This is really important. You know, £500 can make a big difference. It could buy you a bunch of technology that could help you. It could help you pay for screening questionnaires. It could, could just get you that little starting point in order to springboard to the next piece of work. And obviously prizes are another source of funding as well, potentially. And then, of course, there's the external opportunities. And, do you be clear about what kinds of people you would or would not be prepared to work for? Certainly, there are consultancy-based research. Some institutions have different rules. You need to know what they are. You need to speak to the administrators. You need to make sure what you can and cannot get hold of. Because, of course, if you can tie a tiny little pot of money, you might be able to have the chance to spend it. So make sure your PIs don't snaffle it first. Maybe tender launches. Particularly government agencies have a very clear process of offering contract-based research or other kinds of work that may be available, and you need to know what those mechanisms are and at which particular times of years they find one or two coins under the corner of the sofa and they need to get rid of them. So year-end financial spend is a really important time in the kind of consultancy contract area because they want to get rid of the money. So again, know at which time you can capitalize on these things. Obviously, there's trade opportunities. You go to trade shows and see what's going on there, conferences. And my final point there is kind of read outside your discipline, because if you try and change the way you look at the world in relation to your nutritional physical activity, it's really helpful. I'd like to give you one very brief example that happened to me. So some of you may recognize those rather odd square little things on the shirt there. Those are small wearable camera devices. And the reason I got into wearable cameras is I was reading a very odd book on the train which talked about life logging and blogging. And I thought, people who walk around with cameras all day recording what they do, how dull. I'm not a Facebook person and I don't understand this modern stuff. But I did think, actually, if you wore a camera, that might be quite useful. And then I followed it up and looked at it and found a newspaper article that described wearing cameras as a part of a way of carers interacting better with people with dementia. So if they were looking after their partner and they shared their images at the end of the day, they were able to connect for one or two key moments. And that seemed to me, one, a really good story, also two, really important, and three, it could be a really useful technology in helping us understand. And I was interested in how it could be used. So neuroscience kind of background is where I went with that and discovered that it was being used very hard in sort of neurological studies about memory loss, etc. Eventually, after quite a lot of work and time, and really, non-traditional funding sources money does not generally come very quickly. You have to build up a reputation. You have to go along into organizations and just tell them what you do and tell them perhaps this might be an idea, what do you think? We were able to win some PhD sponsorship money from Microsoft to kind of develop this. We went to 2 conferences. There was no physical activity at it whatsoever because it's entirely about this particular method. Now, in fact, we've actually run conferences around this particular area. We've got publications in Special Issue Journal that won at MJ PrevMed, and we transferred just out of the moving about bit and also into food labeling and time use studies as well. So, small things, read outside, capitalize on an opportunity, get out there. You have to sell yourself a little bit, but also have a vision about how you can help. So I think these have been quite useful. You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do, said Henry Ford. You need to go out there and do it. So your kind of development goals. First of all, think about what you can improve personally. Can you be yourself? Can you keep promises? One of the civil servants told me once the most important attribute of anyone working for government is being able to keep your promises, deliver on time in budget. Even if it's not great, you have to get all those things in, first of all. So be a safe pair of hands, develop that reputation. Your academic reputation is all you have. It's invisible and it really matters, and you need to keep working at it. Be fair, all right? Don't bag people in public. Don't bag people behind their backs. Don't bag people in your paper reviews. Be fair, be honest, all right? And you can do this in a diplomatic way. Develop your listening skills and develop your skills at being critical. There's good ways of being critical, and there's less supportive and less helpful ways of being critical. And I think it's really important that we can be critical with ourselves, but in a way that still encourages collaboration. And actually, nobody cries at the end of the day. That's important. On your professional side, again, I've probably mentioned these before: specialism, support structures, mentorship. Mentorship's important. You get somebody else who's a little bit further ahead, a little bit somebody you can feel you can speak to, and ask kind of, well, this is where I am. What do I need to do next? Because that's incredibly helpful. And I've been very blessed to have some very senior and very helpful mentors who were always that little bit further ahead of me in my stage, and I still use them now. They're incredibly helpful. Try and think ahead, but not the same. Anticipate in your particular specialism, where's it going to go to in 5 years' time? What's going to be the big next idea? What is it for physical activity? What is it for nutrition? If you can anticipate what that will be, you'll start thinking, and as the community of intelligence changes, you will be at the front end of that. So think of that. Again, get involved. Simon Marshall said once in an ECR ISBNPA webinar, say yes to everything and then eventually start saying no when you're too busy. But he said get involved, and I think that's a really helpful advice. Try and enjoy different networks, go along to local meetings. If there's a planning application down the road for a big development or an estate or a big load of houses being built, go along and have a look at it. Is there opportunity for you to do some work around there? There could be some really interesting things. Building developers have to spend money, certainly in the UK, on building recreational green spaces. There's a real natural experiments happening all the time. So how can we capitalize on those? Know your network, build a portfolio of skills and things, and try and sort of hit the right tone, be positive and be patient. And sometimes it may not work out now, but you know where we are. We know we can help you. We're always here. And be patient. Reputations are fragile. Okay. And finally, if you're going to go along to anything, be enthusiastic, because it's going to move you a very long way. Okay, I'm nearly there. So my 10 top tips, and they're a start. Non-traditional funding sources are not typical. There's no hard and fast rules, but you will be more successful if you know what you can do and be clear about it. Be positive about your work, work on your networks, get involved, build a track record, get some senior support to mentor you, and remember that kind of SWOT. They can see, someone else could see quite clearly the things you need to work on, and that might be very important, that good helpful feedback. Build networks and build relationships. Find out who is the equivalent person, who's the policy officer for this organization, who's the person who would make the decisions, who's the front-facing person for patient public engagement for a different organization. Invite them along to your seminars, invite them to come and share their work, offer you to go along and talk to them. You can, it's a two-way exchange, and be part of the network that they would think of. Excuse me. Finally, get involved. Certainly at local, regional, national, international organisations. The fact you're a member of ISBNPA is really important. Join us as well, but get involved in the local, regional, and international work. Particularly food culture is very global. Organisations are global ones. I think it's important to have an international perspective also. When you're doing your exercise, when you're going for a walk with your dog, build some space in for critique and self-reflection. How do things go? The question I like to ask myself at the end of the day is, what did I do well? Did I have fun doing it? And if it's no to both of those, it wasn't a good day. And if it's yes, it's a good day. I shared certainly David's perspective on working smarter and not harder. You have to work hard, but be smart. It doesn't feel so bad. Okay, understand the needs and the context of the organisations you'd be interested in approaching or you might feel you could work with. Schools, workplaces, hospitals, primary care, transport systems, they all have a particular culture, they all have a particular language, and they all have a particular way of working. You need to understand that. So if you have an advantage from coming from that background, then try and capitalise on it. Remember who the gatekeepers are for organisations, who are the key stakeholders and who you need to involve. And finally, take a risk, because nothing is ever achieved if you play it safe. All right, so encourage people, take a little bit of risk, check it out with your friends, check to see which one might be possible, but have a go, because if you don't have a go, you won't succeed. Okay, so hopefully I've covered my applications there. If you want to take a risk, play tennis on an airplane, it's always good fun, and make sure you can go out there and find some non-traditional sources. So hopefully it's food for thought, reflect in your own areas and competence, and good luck, and I really hope to hear some success stories when we all meet up in Cape Town. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Charlie. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. I just got a sign saying my audio is not connected, so I was hoping I'm working okay. Now, I don't think any questions came through during your presentation, Charlie, but if anyone's got any questions?
Everyone's gone to sleep or woken up, depending on where they are.
I guess I have one quick one, if I'm allowed. I guess in terms of a non-traditional funding source, what was the most surprising one that you've received from from an unexpected source?
Unexpectedly is we've had money from religious-based organisations who are interested in physical activity becoming part of their kind of way they operate, and this really surprised me. Why not? It just seemed a really different way of viewing the world. I think every time you work with a traditional funding source, they always have a very different worldview to the one that we usually have, and I think you have to understand their perspective. When you do, you'll be really useful for them.
Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes you never know sometimes where they're coming from, and I think that's a good tip for everybody. Well, thank you so much. Well, people might think of questions which we can have a little bit of time at the end as well for you, Charlie. So
actually,
we'll move on.
I've got one for Charlie if I could. It's David.
Yeah.
I think it's very current, and I think I know the answer because Charlie's already talked about the importance of reputation. He's talked about who he does take funding from and won't. So industry, obviously, industry has money. Researchers often feel under pressure to bring in resources, and there's obviously been some very bad decisions made by some key researchers in the field in recent times. Do you have any advice for young researchers about how to handle that pressure, to try and attract money when there is industry sources out there? And I guess there's some areas that some people might consider grey. I personally consider it's fairly black and white, but just be interested in a view, Charlie, on that.
Okay. Well, I think David and I probably have the same worldview when it comes to industry funding. It's a personal choice. I'm not going to bag researchers who've perhaps unwittingly taken money from organisations that claim to be one thing and you discover they're not. My view is when someone offers you money, there's a reason. Usually you have to work hard to get good money that's kind of safe and comes from sources that you think are ethical, etc. Do your research on the organisations who are talking to you. I certainly know there are a couple of organisations around who claim to be open-ended and foundation-based, and that they're fronts for particular large organisations, and you just have to be really careful. It also baits out for media outlets as well. One of the new industry tricks is to offer to help to disseminate your science, and they'll offer free access to media consultants, etc., on a kind of neutral organisation. It's not neutral, and some people had their fingers burned on the front as well. I think you have to make a personal choice, and you have to stick to it, and I think you should not hide it in any way. You should be out there and public about it, and then everyone knows where you're up to.
Charlie, we've got a couple of questions come through. One's from Ian Lahart. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. Has Charlie got any advice around forming collaborations with clinicians?
Yes. Clinicians think differently. You need to understand their mindset. You need to understand what's important, and you need to understand that they are under incredible time pressure. So whatever you're offering to them doesn't take huge amounts of resources or time. And in fact, if you can spend time in that culture and spend time working within or observing it, you'll understand it a lot quicker. So I spent a lot of time working in primary care, certainly in England, and my views changed massively about the time pressure, the session presses, etc. You know, we ask people to do things sometimes with unrealistic expectations that they have the skills and time and energy to do. You know, they have a lot of other things that are pressing on them. So how can you create a system that will survive and be sustainable in infrastructure? So get in there, talk to clinicians, find out what matters, and see if you can help them. All right, and it's a long game with clinicians generally.
And we've got one more quick one from Ryan Hulteen. Charlie, you talked about knowing your skill set and using that to your advantage, especially if you've had prior experience, for example, PE teacher. Do you feel there is an advantage or disadvantage if you don't have prior experience in anything but academia? I suppose your answer that you just gave in regards to clinicians is a good one for this one too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we all come with experiences in life. It doesn't matter if you haven't worked anywhere else. You know, if you can listen, you can observe, and you can empathize with what's going on, you'll understand the context, you'll understand the values, and you'll be able to help and support something. But that just takes time. So to go and immerse yourself with a group you're keen to work with who feel that there's a need. That's what I would push, Ryan. So get out there and you know, just go for it. Just find some people that you think you were interested in working with, because at the end of the day, we all need data. And that's what we need to generate in order to answer scientific questions and also survive. Okay.
So it is about building relationships. Yeah. Thank you so much, Charlie. In the interest of time, we'll move on to David, who I introduced earlier. Have you got your slides here?
I'm going to turn my camera off too.
Beautiful. Now, Joe, can you see my slides yet?
No.
Here we go. Just bear with us while we deal with the technical issues. Okay, show my screen. Show my presentation. Can you see them now?
I can't yet.
Yes, David. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks particularly to the organisers. I think these kind of events are really important, and as an early career researcher, I wished I'd had opportunities like this. We are a little short of time, so I'm going to rush through some of these. I think a lot of what I'm going to say will overlap with aspects of what Charlie said, so we're probably singing from the same hymn book here. I want to quickly talk about some of my own early experiences just to provide a bit of context. I particularly want to focus on issues around building track record and positioning yourself in the field so that you can win grant applications. And I am going to talk primarily about the traditional sources, but I think many of the issues are relevant to any funding source. And then I'm going to finish off with what I think are the most important things you can do to improve your chance of success in actually putting a grant proposal together. And I think much of this will be familiar to many of you, but I think for all of us it's good to hear these things again and to think about them. So in my own case, after I finished my PhD, it took me 5 years to win my first grant. And for those initial years, I was quite despondent. I thought I was never going to win a grant. I was working incredibly hard along with my colleagues, but we just weren't having success. The first grant that I won was a relatively small one, $35,000. It came from an organisation called Diabetes Australia, which is one of the non-government organisations that funds research here. But I thought I was king of the world when I won this money. It was absolutely life-changing. It validated everything we'd been trying to do. And since that time, along with my collaborators, both at IPAN but more broadly, we've won grants totaling over 25 million Australian dollars. So we've had good success over a period of time. And these are the funding sources I've had money from over the past 5 years. Most of these at the, I guess, the top 2/3 you describe as fairly traditional funding sources, and then towards the bottom are some of the health insurance companies. And we certainly had funding in the past from a variety of other sources as well. So we've had experience chasing money from all sorts of organisations. But I think many of the approaches, many of the strategies you use are similar regardless of the organisation. So what was it that happened to allow me to win that first grant? And Charlie alluded to this already. I talk a lot about this. I think, you know, my team, the people I was collaborating with, and all of you, you know, work incredibly hard. But I don't know that I, in those initial years, was working terribly smart. So I think some of the things that changed was that I looked around and I determined who I could team up with, and I worked together with them to develop common goals and strategies. So we really, I guess, started to be strategic in our approach. So rather than being busy, working long hours, started to really think carefully about where we were heading and how we were going to get there. We took a decision to carve out a particular niche in the space that we're in, and we had a lot of competitors. So Charlie talked about those, you know, who else is out there, you know, who are you competing against? And so, for example, here in Australia, at the time, there was very, very strong groups working in the area of adult physical activity, and our team took a decision to put a very strong focus on child physical activity, and I think we've really carved out a niche there internationally. So we published in that area, we trained in it, we raised our profile in it, and we really stayed in that space and focused on it and built it over time. So a very strategic, purposeful approach about carving out a niche. That helped us understand what the opportunities were in the field, who were the stakeholders, so who are the end users of the research that we're doing, what are their needs, what are their agendas, and how can we value add to that. So I guess that is partly about this issue of networking and really knowing, you know, who you're doing the research for ultimately. We made a real effort to understand all of the funding schemes that are out there that were relevant to our work, and be really clear about what it is they do fund, but very importantly, what it is they don't fund. So there's no point writing a grant to an organisation who does not have an interest in the kind of ideas that you're putting forward. It's really wasted effort. And I think in those early 5 years, I probably did quite a bit of that, you know, putting forward proposals just in the hope that it might attract their attention and be of interest to them, when the reality was it never was going to be. I think it was really important that we benchmarked our research. So we, you know, looked at, you know, what is the quality of our research? Are we really at the leading edge? And we did that by attending conferences, having visiting fellows come and spend time with us, and sending our people overseas to really ensure that we were at the leading edge of the field, so that the work that we were doing was cutting edge. And I think most importantly, we've created quality time and space to collaborate as a team. And I'll talk more about the importance of team and collaboration in terms of building track record. So, you know, what does it mean to work smart? Well, you know, my view is that there's no such thing as luck in research. You have to plan to be successful, and you have to be absolutely strategic in everything you do. So we hold strategic planning meetings regularly. We review our progress. You know, we have a plan. We've got a strategy to attract the best students, because obviously as you go on in your career, even in the early stages, students, research students, PhD students become quite important as part of your team, part of your workforce, to help you build momentum. Publishing, and I'll talk about that, is incredibly important, and that's regardless of your career stage, but I think particularly in those early years of your career, publishing quality papers in relevant journals in good numbers is very important. And we do things like have writing teams, we hold writing retreats, so we make writing a focus of the kind of work that we do to make sure that we're getting the research out there, and we're continuing to build our track record. And again, this issue of team, making sure that you look out for and look after the other members of your team, and really do work together as a team and support each other. And that's particularly the case for people in the early stages of their career who are still finding their feet. And I think finally, I guess I'd say it's really important to think about who you team up with and who you collaborate with. So there's potentially collaborative opportunities all over the place, but you do need to think really carefully. And for me, teaming up has been the most important thing I've done in my career, and it's been the most satisfying thing. And I think any success I've had is really largely attributable to the team of people, the team of collaborators that I've chosen to work with. And I think we all need to think very carefully about issues around critical mass, forming up into groups, but actually, as I said, working as a team, working together, having common goals, having agreed strategies, you know, supporting each other, particularly during busy and difficult times, both professionally and personally, to really advance the program of work. So, you know, it's the rare person who can be highly successful on their own or you know, without a team around them. So I want to move on to talking about how you build track record. I think, you know, people do their PhDs, they get to the end of it, they draw a breath, they sigh, you know, they can start to live again. But there's in this, you know, what do I do now to go from where I am, having just got my PhD, maybe with 3, 4, 5, 6 publications, whatever they might have achieved during their PhD, to being someone who's got an established track record, who a funding agency will look at and say, well, yeah, we're willing to give this person some money because clearly they know what they're doing. Publications, as I've alluded to, are really important, and I think early in your career are the critical thing. Grant income, winning grant money is also of importance, but I think very early in your career is a secondary issue. And the reality is you're not going to win grant money unless you've got quality publications, generally, certainly from the traditional sources. It can be a little different for the non-traditional sources. You know, there is this saying, publish or perish. I think it's true at every career stage. And one of the things I often hear from early career researchers is that it's, well, how do I publish if I don't have any grant money? Well, the reality is that, you know, good quality research doesn't have to cost a lot. For example, you can write reviews, systematic reviews, you know, with really no resources apart from your own time and energy. And they're highly cited and very useful in the field. Charlie spoke briefly about the fact that there are, most organisations have internal funding schemes, most universities have them, and they're definitely worth competing for, and that kind of seeding money can be really important in terms of getting research going. Working with PhD and other research students that leads to a publication is another way of building your track record and developing up an area. And as of one of the things I think that many early careers researchers don't do enough of is take the opportunity to collaborate with others who've got data, existing data, that they can do secondary analysis on, or add some additional measures to an existing study to value add to that study. So you've got a study that's already funded, you know, it already exists, maybe the data is even there, and, you know, we all generate in our research studies way more data than we can ever publish ourselves. And most people via collaboration are quite happy to share data if there's a relationship that's formed and they know that the data is going to be dealt with appropriately. So really be encouraging you to think about some of these opportunities to get going and start building track record, even though you might not already have a pot of money sitting there. If you want to attract research funding, you need to demonstrate that you're going to be productive. So if someone gives you money, you're going to have to do something with it. From the traditional grant sources, they want to see peer-reviewed grant publications. So it's a competitive world. There's lots of good ideas out there, good people with good ideas. You know, you need to differentiate yourself from other people who've got good ideas, and one way of doing that is demonstrate that you'll take the money, do good things with it, and publish it in quality journals. So publishing is important. For all of us, finding time and space, quality time and space to write is really challenging. And that's true even of people whose job is almost 100% research, which sounds strange, but is the reality. So we need to prioritise writing. We have to aim for the highest quality journal, the highest impact journal. Obviously, international journals are much better than local journals, national journals. And while the number of papers is important in the early part of your career, you always have to have an eye on quality. So you cannot just salami slice data and publish, you know, poor quality papers in very average journals. You need to aim for the best publication in the best journal and produce as many as you can as lead author and then via collaboration. So as I said, we need to prioritise it. If we don't do it, it slips to the bottom of the pile. You need to think about time management, time away from the office, writing retreats. You know, you have to be absolutely pragmatic about this. We've all read hundreds and hundreds of papers, so we know what it takes to write a paper. It's an exercise in joining the dots. Every paper has an introduction which sets up the aims. There's a set of methods. There's a set of results. We discuss the key findings in the context of the existing literature and talk about strengths and weaknesses. This is not difficult, and as Charlie said, practice makes perfect. The more you do, the easier it gets. But you do need to be pragmatic, not put off writing. Writing teams can be really important, and again, this is this issue of teaming up with other people, working collaboratively to get the publications outputs to build your track record and those of your collaborators. And it's an excellent way to progress papers quickly. So where do you begin in the early part of your career? It is very difficult to get any major funding as a lead investigator. As I said, in my case, it took at least 5 years to get a small grant. It took much longer to get a grant of any significance. Starting with those internal funding sources or the small grant schemes. So in my case, Diabetes Australia, $35,000, life-changing for me, but really it was a relatively small grant. And as I said, looking for these opportunities to collaborate with established researchers and work with them as a co-applicant in these larger funding schemes. So even as an associate investigator, so you're not one of the lead people on the grant, but you're there. It helps build your track record, and it gives you that first-hand practical experience in the grant writing process and what it takes to win one of these major grants. So, I think this is an example of get involved. Get involved in your own research environment and figure out what you could contribute to someone else's major grant. It might be a very small part of it, and if you can be named on the grant somewhere and get that experience, it's like gold. Have a plan. Now, you don't need to read this, but this is my plan. It works for me given the context of my role. My view is that at any stage you need a 3 to 5 year plan. You need to know where you're going in terms of your career, in terms of building your track record, and you need to put strategies in place to help you get there. And if you don't do that, the danger is you could end up somewhere where you don't want to be. So we all need a roadmap in terms of building our career, and you probably need plan A and B, and you might even need plan C. But if you're going on a journey and you don't have a map, there's a good chance you'll end up somewhere you don't want to be. So building track record does require planning, thinking really carefully, and this is where mentoring can come in, and Charlie's spoken about that. So I want to move on to actually talking about writing the grant, the proposal, and what's involved. People don't sit down and in a couple of days write a high quality grant that wins the money. It just does not happen. And we've had grant proposals that we've developed over a period of, and we've sometimes tried them to 3, 4, 5 grant funding agencies before we've had success. So you have to be persistent and you have to take the necessary time to build them. So there's a kind of long range planning process here. So it's about planning your research, being clear about the research question, developing the methods, the protocols, the techniques, gathering the pilot data, demonstrating that the study is feasible, and you need to do all of that before you even go to the funding agency to say, give me the money. You need key publications in the area you're seeking the funding in to demonstrate that you actually have the necessary experience. So if someone's going to give you $200,000 US or 50,000 euros or whatever it might be, they want to know that you actually have experience and track record in that area, and you need to develop your collaborative team. So, as we've talked about, it's rarely the case that a single individual is successful. It always takes a team, and you have to develop those relationships and be able to demonstrate to the funding agency that as a team you can work together productively. And again, that takes time. So long-range planning is really important. I guess in the shorter term, in a practical sense, there's application deadlines. So the grant will be due on October the 1st or wherever it is. You need to think about the process of actually writing the application. And again, things like putting together a funding calendar so that you know when the key funding opportunities are arising is important so that you can start planning and working towards that. You need to think really carefully about who it is that's reviewing your proposal, and always have them front of mind when you're writing it. You have to try and put yourself in their position. Quite often they'll be reading several, sometimes many more applications, so you want to make the reviewer's job as easy as possible so that they come away with a very good impression of your proposal. excuse me, something's happened on my screen. You know, you need to think about what you're going to tell them to convince them that your research is important and that you can do it. So, you know, there's a whole lot of research questions out there that we could pose. Some are more important than others, and their importance will depend on who the funding agency is. Most funding agencies want you to solve a problem. So they want you to help, you know, people with diabetes better manage their condition, or people with heart disease to be more physically active to prevent them getting a relapse. So, you know, you really need to make sure that the questions you're putting forward are really important questions. And you need to understand the grant review process for the particular agency, look at their funding criteria and be really clear what it is they're looking for, and understand what differentiates a grant that's considered to be good from one that's excellent to one that's outstanding, because it's really only those grants that are absolutely excellent or outstanding that are going to get funded. National and international grant success rates now are, you know, they can be as low as 5%, somewhere between 5 and 15% generally. It doesn't mean that the other, you know, 80 or 85% of grants are not, you know, good grants and they're not great ideas and it's not important work. It's just that there's so much competition for a limited pool of money. And that's where the significance of the grant or the innovative aspects of it become important. You know, does the research really matter? Will it make a difference? And I'm talking about, will it make a difference in the real world? Will it help solve a real world problem? Is it a novel question, or has this been addressed before? Has it been done over and over? The so what question is really important. So if the reviewer reads the grant, you know, and they think, well, so what? You know, why will the world be a better place if we answer this question? So you really need to make the significance of the work very, very clear. And as I said, demonstrate that what you're doing is innovative, it's new, it's novel. And I think quite importantly, why does this question need to be answered now? So why do we need to do this piece of research now? Could it be done in 3 years or 5 years' time? So is there an urgency about getting it done? And this needs to be reflected in the kind of writing that you do within your grant proposal. And you can't just assert these things. They do have to be evidence-based. Is the work going to be feasible? You know, can you demonstrate the feasibility of it? We talked before about the importance of taking time to develop it up, pilot work and so forth. Can you recruit the subjects? So being able to demonstrate, one thing having a great idea, but being able to demonstrate that for you and your team it is feasible to pull off the study. You can recruit the necessary number of people, you can measure the things you say you want to say.
David, are you still there?
I think we lost David. Let's see.
So close to the end. Maybe while David's trying to reconnect, people can type questions that they've thought of during David's presentation.
Or if you want, you can raise your hand and now. Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, Charlie.
Joe, it's Charlie here. Just while we're waiting for David to come back, one thing that struck me is how organised he is and how hard he's prioritised writing. And you've worked with David for a while. Is that really true?
Yes, it is, and those deliberate strategies that he was identifying around, you know, that we actually said we're actually going to work in this area, and then, you know, what do we need to do to build our track record in that area? Started with things like, you know, literature reviews in that area to start to show that you're working in that field, and, you know, that they're easy things that early career researchers can do. You know, if they don't have any data initially, they can do a literature review. So, you know, those sorts of things, writing is really important.
Yeah, good. No, and I got the sense he you know, that there's a sort of culture of protecting time in the week just to write.
David,
yes, so we do. Yes, so we do writing retreats and you know, carve out time usually away from the office, because often there's a lot of interruptions in the office, and it can be difficult to really focus and concentrate. But more recently, because time is precious, we've started to try things like snack writing, where you have half an hour at least every morning where you do a little bit of writing and to try and progress papers and grant writing.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got some good ideas there for my lot. Thank you very much.
So have any other questions come through, Antonio?
Yep. See. From Adewal is questioning, is the writing approach similar for traditional and non-traditional funding sources?
Is the writing different?
Okay.
So Charlie, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I would suspect it is different, simply because traditional funding resources either have two approaches. They call for a particular type of research that they feel is important and they would like some answers to. For example, today in England there was a call for interventions to reduce sedentary behaviour, which has just come out, and you would respond to that particular call, or you propose your own research, sort of, and you fire it in there and assume it would get funded under a particular theme, so maybe public health research, natural experiments, or nutrition related, or disease related outcome type of research. I think non-traditional funding is much slower. There's much more of a negotiation about what's important and what could be done, and it's much more collaborative, the kind of construction of the research or evaluation question, because there's a negotiation going on, helping the non-traditional funding bodies to decide what their priorities are. So I think they are different. At the end of the day, the writing still has to happen. You need a protocol, a question, a rationale, why it makes a difference, why it will matter, what will be different when it's been done, and where it will take the organisation after they've got the data and results. So I think they are quite different.
Yeah, I think David's joined us again, and David, just Charlie was helping answer a question which maybe you ought to also think about at the end, which is how different the writing might be for traditional versus non-traditional. But over to you, David.
Yeah, apologies for that. I think our power went out for a couple of minutes. So I was talking about the actual writing of the application, and look, some of this is writing 101, but as I've said earlier, the key job here is to make the reviewer's job as easy as possible. So the more you can do to develop your proposal, the better. Looking at successful applications from colleagues is gold. People are generally willing to share them. Make sure you attend the grant information sessions and really understand what the funding agency is looking for, what the criteria are. Writing incredibly clearly, don't use jargon, state things simply. Most of the people reviewing the grants will not be experts in your field. You might be lucky to strike people who have a working knowledge of the area. Often, however, the people reading your grants will have minimal knowledge, and so you can't assume that they understand the field, so you really have to lay it out for them. So I'm going to move on because I know we're time poor here. Improving your chance of success, and I want to cover off these very, very briefly, and I've already talked about some of this already. So track record, good collaborators and team, giving yourself time, taking feedback, making repeated attacks, and taking the opportunity to review other people's grants. I've talked about track record already, but really, what you need to do as an early career researcher, what we all need to do is demonstrate that we are the expert in a particular area. You're the go-to person. And again, Charlie spoke about this briefly. So you need to focus your track record in a particular area and not be too diverse in the kind of projects you get involved in. And so there's lots of opportunities that come along. With every opportunity is an opportunity cost. So you have to think about, is it evaluating to the track record I'm trying to build in my particular area of expertise? And make sure that you can develop yourself as the expert in a particular area. We've talked about the importance of planning, identifying benchmarks in the area, and thinking about your publishing. Are there key papers you need to publish to establish your credentials in the field and to underpin the grant application that you're going to write in a year or 2 years' time? Good collaborators as a team, critically important. You need a breadth of skills on the project, so you don't want 4 people as a collaborative team on a research grant that all look the same. They all have to bring different skills that value add to that particular project, and reviewers very quickly see through people adding people to their grant simply because they've got a large CV but really are bringing nothing new to the project. Collaborators are really important in terms of grants because they'll provide not just input but critical feedback on the proposal. You need to demonstrate you've had a working relationship with people generally for most grant schemes. They want to know that the team can work together and will be productive together. You need to recognise that collaborators often get booked up early for grants. Many grant schemes, there's a limit to the number of grants that any individual can be on for that scheme, and so good collaborators can get booked up. So you need to be forming those relationships early, developing the grant proposal early so that they're on board. And as I said, each investigator on the grant has to have a clear role, and it must be clear what their contribution is going to be. Time is probably the greatest enemy, not just this morning or this evening, wherever you might be, but in terms of grant writing, adequate time to read, write and reflect on the grant, and often that's the part that doesn't happen. People are still writing their grant the day before it's due. Those grants are rarely, if ever, successful. So grants that are developed, set aside, you come back to, you refine, you have other people comment on it, you take on board that comment is really the way to build the best possible, the strongest grant. Internal review processes, so get people not involved in the grant so that they can provide another point of view. Take the feedback and incorporate it, critically important. Make sure you've got statistical advice at the beginning. It impacts not just the methods but also the budget, and think about the practicalities of lodging your grant proposal because at least in many of the grant systems we deal with, they're online systems, and at the last moment they become overloaded and it can be quite frustrating trying to get your grants up. Take advice. People will give you, they'll give you a view on your grant, but you have to be prepared to take it on board. When we write grants, we become very close to the ideas, become very close to the words we've written on the paper, but really if the message isn't getting across in a convincing way, you have to be prepared to make changes. If people haven't understood your grant, there must be a problem with it, so take the feedback. It's really important to rework your grant if it doesn't get up with one funding agency and submit it to somewhere else, but this might involve a whole lot of work and you have to be prepared for that. So you can't simply take it, an unsuccessful grant, and throw it at another grant agency and hope it'll be successful. Think about why grants haven't been successful and try and refine them and develop them further. So that does involve, as I said, letting go of some of your ideas sometimes. And be persistent. You can take one idea or project and try it with many funding sources. And of course, the more grants you submit, the more times you'll be rejected. And being an academic really is a life of rejection. Grants are rejected, papers are rejected. And so you need to be resilient. You need to be prepared for the fact that, only 1 in 6, 1 in 7 grants is successful, and so it's normal to be rejected. And get used to it. It's going to be part of your professional life. You can also look at opportunities to value add to other existing projects in terms of your grant writing. So small proposals that value add to an existing piece of work. You can take large projects and make them into smaller projects and try them with different funding agencies. So I guess there's different ways of being persistent with an idea. If at the end of the day, of course, you've got an idea and it just doesn't get funded after many, many, many attempts, there's probably a clear message in that. So, you just have to be prepared sometimes to let go completely. And I guess my final piece of advice is to take the opportunity to read and review other people's grants. It's, seeing how other people approach it is very, very valuable. It helps you understand the review process, and it really helps your thinking in terms of how you would sell the idea, because ultimately that's what you're doing. You've got an idea, you're trying to sell it to a funding agency so that you'll give you the money to solve the problem. And the more grants you read, and particularly successful grants, the better your own grant will be. So I think if I've rushed, I'm at the end. So I guess my take-home message is we all work hard, but do we all work smart? And I do think pausing, developing a plan, being strategic, being outcome-focused is really important. So get a plan together, and working with others more senior than you, mentors, can help you develop up your plan so that you carve out your niche, you become the expert in an area, you're recognised as such, and then the funding agency wants to give you the money because clearly you're the go-to person. I do think it's critical to team up with the right kind of people and then to work as a team and be strategic in everything you do. And as I've said, writing has to be more of a priority for all of us, writing papers so that you've got track record, but also taking time to write grants to position yourself to be successful. Thank you, and I'm sorry I had to rush at the end there.
Thanks, David. Great job under trying circumstances. Oh, there, there we are. Nice fluffy koala to finish off. Now, we are out of time, but I guess if someone had a burning question, we might have time for one quick question before we finish up. Otherwise, feel free to I guess contact, I haven't asked you if this is okay, David and Charlie, but feel free to contact David, Charlie, or else myself, Antonio, or Wendy at ECR with any further questions. And I think to Wendy, if I can just come back to you, for those who are ISBNPA members, early career researchers and ISBNPA members, there was a questionnaire, a survey going around. Are you still looking for people to do that survey, Wendy?
Yes, I am. I already sent it, Antonio already sent it to all the members. I resent it to part of them. So if you got the email and didn't fill it in yet, please do, because it would give us very interesting information about what you want and what you need regarding our ECR or student network. So please help us, and hopefully we can further make events like this that are so interesting and so successful. So thanks.
So Joe, I think there are a couple of questions that have come through. One from Ian about tips on how to improve writing and any resources we've found useful. Yeah, there certainly are some good resources out there. I'm happy to dig out a few and I'll send them to Wendy, who can maybe disseminate them. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep. But look, I think the message from me, and I'm sure Charlie would agree, is the more writing you do, the better. And sometimes, you know, one of the things as an exercise that would be good to do would be to get a funding application form from one of the key agencies in your country, the Heart Foundation or whoever it might be that you're thinking of applying to, whether or not you're actually wanting to write a grant to them, and actually just try and write up one of your ideas into a grant proposal and see what's involved. And then, you know, talk with colleagues about it, so workshop it. So practice makes perfect, but there are resources out there.
So yes, there were a couple of questions down there, but are we out of time now, Antonio?
Yes, we 3 minutes over time, but it's up to you. If David or Charlie feel that they can answer, you'll be open.
So someone's posed a question from Chloe then, is it a bad idea for PhD students to apply for money to support their own PhD position? So Charlie, you might be more familiar with this territory than mine. I think this is more of a European phenomenon. It's certainly less common in Australia.
Yeah, thanks, David. A great present. I really enjoyed the presentation, by the way. Yes, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea to be clear about the construction of your PhD application with your supervising team. So the earlier that happens, the better. Yeah, it probably is a bit more of a European thing when you come along with an idea, but there's a negotiation stage. You know, you are pitching yourself as much as your idea, and you know, a good supervisor can see through the sort of skills deficit to the kind of personal qualities that you will need to do a good PhD. So yeah, I think negotiate as early as you can and get that relationship building up as soon as you can. It won't do any harm.
And Ian's asked any tips on how to improve your writing, any resources you found useful.
David?
Well, as I said, I think there are a lot of resources out there, and I'm happy to dig some of the ones out that I've referred, for example, my own PhD students to, and share them through ISBNPA. There's certainly a lot of web-based materials out there. There's the classic book in this area is one that was called Scientists Must Write, if you want to Google that. So Scientists Must Write, and I think it picks up on some of the kind of things that we've touched upon, which is around being clear, being concise, knowing who you're writing for, not assume knowledge that the reviewer or the reader may not have, and so forth. But certainly happy to share some of those resources.
Thanks, David.
I go back a bunch of successful applications. Go and have a look at them. Sorry, Jo.
And there's one more. Ellie asked, during the 5 years post-PhD it took you to win your first grant, she was wondering what the key things were you did to keep your motivation up.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I have to admit that at various points, and Jo, you were, we were all in the same position early on in our careers, working together. Look, I think part of it was being within a team so that we could support each other during those difficult times. I guess having, we're all having the same experience, and I think, we won the small grant, and then within 6 months, I think we won another 3 or 4 grants, which were, reasonably significant in size. The Vic Health grants, I'm thinking of, Jo. So look, I think it was around, peer support was really important. We did continue to publish. We had data in hand, or we had access to data, and of course, I think I was publishing from some of the national data sets, so our National Health Survey. So that was data that was freely available. I was doing secondary analysis, so I was able to remain productive even though we didn't have funding. But look, there's no hiding the fact that writing grant applications and being unsuccessful is not pleasant. It's not nice, but as I said just a few minutes ago, it is normal. It is what most people in the field experience, and we all have to get used to it and be prepared for it.
Thank you. Look, I want to say a big thank you to both Charlie and David for really nicely complementary presentations. You did really well not to overlap, and it was terrific, and I think shows the importance of experience, but also I think hopefully giving all of the attendees today some good tips and strategies, and I hope that it leads to success for everybody on the call today. So thank you very much, and again thanks to Wendy for organising this webinar.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks to the organizers.
Jill, thank you for moderating it in a good way. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we can close it then. So thanks everybody for being here, and hopefully we'll see you on our next event in Cape Town or online. Bye.
Bye-bye.